Hello, it's Amy, and I'm here with a nice cup of tea and the Journal of Emily Shore once again. We are drinking some wild cherry, nothing fancy, just the Celestial Seasonings brand of tea. And it's quite refreshing on a chilly evening here. We will set the tea aside on the coaster and open up the Journal of Emily Shore. And if you're not familiar with this series of videos, this is the diary of a teenage girl in the United Kingdom in the 1830s. And it was edited by family members and published in 1891. And we are in the year 1835 when she was about 15 or 16 years old. And in the last entries, she had been visiting London, but as we're going to find here in the entry for June 11th, 1835, she has returned from London to her home in Woodbury. I am very glad to return at last to the quiet of Woodbury, much as I have liked this little excursion. We find everybody well, and the number of our bird pets somewhat increased. A cock bullfinch, shy as the species is, 2 days ago flew into the schoolroom. Its head was bare of feathers, probably with fighting. Richard introduced him to his hen bullfinch. They live very amicably together. Mackworth is rearing a young blackbird, and Arabella and Louisa have 2 young chaffinches, which the mother feeds. A few days later we went to town. Em found a coal tit's nest with 6 or 7 young ones. He brought it to the house, and the mother came every day with food, which she brought every 5 minutes. She even forced her way into the cage in her anxiety to feed them. In about a fortnight, the young ones were full-feathered and flew away. The mother fed them only with small green caterpillars. The young ones had grown very tame and perched on the heads, hands, and shoulders of the children. So I'm a little bit confused why they would take a nest full of young birds and put it in a cage when the mother bird is evidently very much present and tracked them down. I think that's a little bit cruel on their part, but somewhat useless to judge 200 years in the past. June 19, Friday. As my ear gets more practiced in distinguishing the songs of birds, I am surprised to find how many differences there are between the songs of different individuals, even of species which have unvarying songs, as the chaffinch and hedge sparrow. I observe this mostly in the chaffinch and willow wren. I am persuaded that, were my ear acute enough to discover it, I should find that no 2 individuals sang exactly alike. At present, I perceive that the chaffinches of Kent have a much softer and more liquid tone than any others I know, and even add 2 or 3 notes. Those of Woodbury are very inferior performers, though they differ considerably from one point in another of excellence. June 22nd, Monday. The hay is beginning to be cut everywhere. I noticed yesterday and today that Mr. Astl's field, where the hay is cut, the redstarts collect and peck about on the ground, doubtless to find some insect which frequents hay. I have seen as many as 3 together, an unusual number in so shy and solitary a bird. Elle has observed the same in our garden, where we are cutting the hay. A redstart, which frequents the garden and has built a nest and laid 1 egg, hops a great deal about the new mown grass. I wish I was sufficiently an entomologist to know what food it finds there. Mamma has bought a young jay, not quite fledged, which is to be her pet, and I have the care of him. His name is Krakow, a word which he will easily learn to say. He is kept in a large wicker cage in my room. Elle had 2 young blackbirds. One died, but the other is alive and well able to fly about and peck for himself. We call him Model. She takes him every day to the garden and lets him run on the lawn, where he picks up ants for himself. June 23, Tuesday. Yesterday we put Model in Krakow's cage. They were very friendly and jump on each other's backs. Model's screams for food woke me this morning before 5. I immediately came and fed them and found them very ravenous. Krakow is certainly in good health and very promising. He opens his beak very wide and flaps his wings whenever I offer him a bit of meat. After breakfast, I mean, he diligently plumed himself and then sat sleepily on his perch. He is not so near, so sprightly and active as Model. Jack, the jackdaw, is still alive, healthy, and happy. He lives under the weeping ash, where he has a little house to retire to which he thinks proper. He eats meat, bread, and potatoes, besides the insects he gets for himself. He is very fond of fine colors and loves to carry in his beak petals of red or crimson flowers. He is rather ill-tempered and soon takes offense. His favorite is Papa, who is also very fond of him. I shall now copy out into my journal a short set of notes, which, in imitation of one in the Penny magazine, I kept this spring of the progress of vegetation and the appearances of insects and birds. And I don't think I'll read this list, but I'll just flip the book and show you. And so she has a list of her observations by month and day. And just a sample here, so March 2nd, sweet violet blooms. May 6th, birch in leaf. June 5th, black woodpecker, very rare, lays eggs. And so it's observations like that. June 26th, Friday. Krakow is wonderfully restless and inquisitive and loves running over the room and perching on everything he sees. He notices every sound and sits in an attitude of extreme attention while the breakfast or dinner bell rings. When very hungry, his loud screams, the red interior of his open beak, and the violent flapping of his wings are quite ridiculous. He will plume himself for a quarter of an hour together. June 29, Monday. I took Krakow out on the lawn to run about, and at last showed him to Jack to see if they were likely to agree together in future. I put my hand above him to preserve him from danger, and thought him safe, especially when Jack, immediately running up, stood by his side without turning his head or beak to him. But I presently found this seeming indifference was only an artifice of Jack, for the malignant creature, swift as lightning, dashed his tremendous beak on poor Krakow's wing and pulled him down on his back. The unhappy little bird sent forth the most piteous cries, while the would-be murderer darted back, uttering his own cry of wrath and ill temper. I found that, with cruel instinct, he had fixed on the principal joint of the wing, and would certainly have broken it had I not been there. As it is much hurt, and Krakow is dull and ill, but not, I think, in danger. I am afraid all hopes are at an end of his and Jack's living peaceably together. Jack is peculiarly ill-tempered. He, in his early youth, killed 2 small chickens and made an attack also on Elle's young blackbird. He is fond, too, of biting people through their stockings. Krakow is very good-tempered and has a sweet expression. He is not ravenous and does not eat as well as he did. I showed him a little pan of water, and he drank some, and continually licked his beak after it with his tongue. He sometimes raises his crest. He pecks a good deal at nail-heads and the hay that gets entangled in his feet. When he is old enough to peck his food, he may be allowed to drink freely. As for Jack, his would-be murderer, he himself is the most extraordinary bird possible. His whims and caprices are without end, and are all unaccountable. When we first had him, his place of residence was on the east side of the house, before the breakfast room. We then, finding that he picked the pinks to pieces, removed him to the west side and placed his house underneath the weeping ash opposite the library. But the fanciful creature is always shifting his quarters from place to place. For some time he could never be induced to quit his house. Then he took into his head that when his food was brought, he would come for it to the distance of a yard all round the cage, but beyond that he would not go. At present he has chosen to abandon his house and the ash altogether, and is comfortably in the midst of a flower bed. He has marked for himself a boundary of a foot all round it, beyond which nothing can induce him to step. If a piece of bread is thrown to him, he will let the sparrows eat it before his eyes, rather than go an inch too far for it. Sometimes he has a fancy of never stepping on grass. sometimes of never stepping on mold. Sometimes he will sit for days together under one plant, or on the underbar of a seat in the garden. He has a great hatred to gloves, and is furious if anyone strokes his head with one. He is fond of bright colors, and if scarlet-colored petals are given him, he seizes and carefully hoards them up. He eats bread and meat. His appetite is small. He is courageous and malignant, and evidently loves to inflict pain, which his great bill renders him very capable of doing. His wings being cut, he cannot fly, but he hops very fast. July 11, Saturday. A tabby moth, which M caught for me yesterday, and which I set with pins and supposed quite dead, for not even the antenna moved, actually laid eggs all last night and continued it this morning, so that I suppose it was alive. The eggs are 12 or 14 in number, small, hard, and white. I shall preserve them till next year, that they may hatch, for I believe the caterpillar is unknown to naturalists. July 16, Thursday. Poor Krakow is in a lamentable condition, though not ill. Having, through weakness, lost the use of his legs, they have become, by lying under him, frightfully twisted and deformed, so that he will probably be a cripple for life. I cannot, however, bear the thought of killing him. He looks so gentle and mild. By Miss O'Keel's advice, I have straightened his legs as well as I can, and then bound them in adhesive plaster, which will perhaps do them good. I keep him always in a basket, because the more he moves, the more he will hurt his wing. July 20, Monday. For 2 or 3 days I have observed a species of wasp come frequently into my room and enter the keyhole of my dressing-table drawer, where it stayed a considerable time. This morning I found 2 green caterpillars in the lock, each rolled up in a particular position and both alive. It did not occur to me that there was any connection between their appearance and the visits of the wasp, and I was much puzzled to account for their being there. Soon after, the wasp returned, bearing, to my surprise, one of these caterpillars amongst its feet. It carried it into the interior of the lock, and there spent some time in rolling it up into a ball, so that, though still alive, it had not the power of moving. I then discovered that it was the Dineris mucaris, or mason wasp, which always hoards up caterpillars in its nests for its progeny to eat, and I was greatly pleased at the opportunity of watching its curious habits. The caterpillars are all of the same sort. I do not know their name, but they are as follows in appearance. Length about 2/3 of an inch, pale yellow-green, neck tinged with brown, head shining dark brown. A thread-like streak of a dark green runs along the back and along each side. The rings are 13. There are a few scattered hairs over the body. Soon after disposing of this caterpillar, the wasp returned with a pellet of sand between her forefeet, and carrying it into the lock, proceeded to form her nest. For about 2 hours I watched her proceedings, and noted the times of her returns and stays in the lock. During that time she made 13 visits. At 10 minutes past 10 o'clock, she brought a pellet and stayed 3 minutes, disposing it properly. At 19 minutes past, she brought another and stayed 16 minutes, half of which time she lay motionless in the lock, perhaps secreting saliva to knead up her next pellet. At 11 o'clock she returned, always with a pellet, stayed 1 minute. At 4 minutes past 11 she returned, stayed 1 minute. At 8.5 minutes past 11 she returned, stayed 1.5 minutes. At 17 minutes past 11 she returned, stayed 1.5 minutes. At 30 minutes past 11 she returned, stayed 2 minutes. At 25 minutes to 12 she returned, stayed 2.5 minutes. At 20 minutes to 12 she returned, stayed 4 minutes. At 9 minutes to 12 she returned, stayed 2 minutes. At 4 minutes to 12 she returned, stayed 4 minutes. At 4 minutes past 12 she returned, stayed 1 minute. At 8 minutes past 12 she returned and stayed 6 minutes. After this she was disturbed and came no more, so that I am afraid she has deserted her nest. I have examined it as well as I can. She has much lessened the entrance, which is through the interior opening of the keyhole, by building it up with pellets of sand. Each pellet is about the size of a gooseberry seed. She dropped one by accident. I picked it up. It was not broken. I found it to consist entirely of moistened sand. This mason wasp is smaller than the common wasp, differently colored and shaped of brighter hues and with more black. Her strength must be great to carry a caterpillar as large as herself. The servant Anne says that she has often found caterpillars in locks, without knowing how they came there. This predilection for locks is curious but quite explainable. It saves the insect the trouble of boring a hole several inches deep. And that takes us to the end of chapter 6. And chapter 7 here will take us into July of 1835 until the end of April 1836. And I find that quite interesting with the mason wasp and the caterpillars in the lock. It's a little bit disturbing to read about the poor bird, though. The fact that she, took that poor bird that was in captivity over to another bird known for having a bad temper, and it got injured and is evidently in poor health. That's kind of unfortunate, and I don't think she should have allowed those birds to be anywhere near each other. But chapter 7 will take us into the summer of 1835, and she will remain at Woodbury, I believe, for the entirety of that chapter. So we'll leave it there for now.